Thanks, Cleo. So today we'd like to show you how to maximize the value of your sales and marketing teams. We'll be doing this by showing you the use of industry keywords in Judo to build segmented clusters of related companies. We'll be looking at the Judo saved search functionality to define your territories based on geography and company size. And I'll look at some of the practical uses for Judo data to make sure that you have a fair distribution of accounts within your teams. Finally, we'll also be looking at using the Judo ultimate parent references so that you can populate your CRM, for example, your Salesforce account hierarchies. In the last webinar, you might remember that we covered matching your data from your CRM into Judo, finding new companies with similar attributes, and then exporting that data to your CRM. And if you haven't already looked at the webinar, I would suggest it would be really good to view our on-demand webinar. This webinar builds on where we left off in the previous one. So to start with, let's look at the use of industry keywords in Judo. So one of the questions that came up in the last webinar was whether you could export industry keywords. These are a proprietary feature of the Judo platform, and the aim of the keywords is to make it much more usable than, for example, the standard industry classification, SIC codes. The thing about the industry keywords is there might be hundreds of thousands of different keywords, and also the problem it also exists with SIC codes. So you can see here a typical export that you might get from a list from Judo. So it has all our companies, and also you can see the kinds of SIC codes that you would typically get against a list. If I just show you how this list would look as a pivot table, just so that we can see all the unique values of each of the industry codes. This is quite typical of how I find lists often get exported, no matter where the data comes from. So quite often you have quite very broad categories. So in this example, so we have 700 companies in this list. So about 10% of these are classified as head offices. Other examples, business support activities, holding companies, blanks, you know, categories that are very, very broad and not necessarily very useful. And bearing in mind the thing that you're probably going to want to use the industry data for is to help you with segmentation. I personally think it's a really important tool to be able to segment your data so that you can target different companies based on the message that you want to give to different groups of companies. So for example, I mean, each company is unique, obviously, but for example, you might want to have a broad category for manufacturing, but then for very specific areas within financial services. So it might be that you want to target banks versus insurance companies, but then manufacturing as a whole, you know, is one category in its own right. So what we'll show here in Judo is building up your own clusters of industry keywords so that you can target very specifically those areas. And then we can get around this problem here of the SIC codes. So just to summarize, the standard industry classification code is not always that particularly useful. We need accurate segmentation to target and tailor your messages, and then we can use Judo's proprietary industry keywords to be much more specific where it matters to your business, but also at the same time more concise to make it simpler and improve your reporting. And also it's going to be more accurate because these are based on what companies themselves identify and you know, how we've identified those companies in terms of the business activities that they undertake. So let's jump into Judo. So we have here the same list that we started building in our last webinar, and let's assume that this list represents the companies that we have in our CRM. So what we can do here is go to Find Companies, and then we want to narrow it down to those companies that are in our CRM. So that's limited this search to those 700 companies that are in the CRM. And then we can go to Industry, and rather than using the SIC codes, what we're going to do is build up a saved search that includes all the industry keywords in my particular segment. So let's just assume here that we were going for a relatively broad financial services industry segment. So we might have banks, we might have insurance companies, and we can choose the different types of insurance that we're interested in. We might have financial services more broadly, and maybe mortgage, and so on. You can build up your industry segment with, tens or even hundreds of these keywords to be as specific or as broad as you want in that segment. And as you're doing that, you can see interactively how many companies from your CRM and your list in Judel are covered by that segment. And then you can save that segment. So let's bookmark this combination of filters, and we'll call it industry segment financial services. And just to give you an idea, you might have one for retail and wholesale, for example, financial services, which might include a number of extra keywords. You might have one for professional services, and maybe one for leisure. These are all just examples. As I say, you can be as specific or as broad as you want. But in our case, we had 700 companies in the original list. And you can see here that we've got 94 in the retail and wholesale, 291 in financial services, 206 in our professional services search, and 87 in our leisure search. And so that broadly covers the 700 companies in the list. The thing to bear in mind here is that, of course, these lists are not exclusive to one another, so you might have some companies that have crossover, particularly if your lists are more specific. So, a company that might be a bank might also offer insurance services, so there's a good chance that they might cross over into multiple categories. That could be something that you find useful. So you could export each of these lists and then tag them with a separate industry tag within your CRM if you want to be able to segment on any of those things. Or likewise, you might want to be able to have a single industry per company, in which case you can add these search results into a static list. So you can add companies to list, and then you can apply the filter that says, so we can say here, not in our list, so we can say not in our financial services list that we added previously. And then for each list, you can say not in the previous list. And that will give you an exclusive set of companies for each of the industry segment lists. Moving on to territories. So if we want to define saved searches to show our territories, you might want to use a similar saved search that is based on your companies in your CRM. And then you might want to narrow that down to specific geographies within your target area. Likewise, you might also want to do that for the same exercise for prospecting. So if you have a named account model, you can use the companies that are in your CRM, or if you're looking to use Judel for prospecting, you might want to set other criteria. For example, you might want to use your industry search to say, give me all the financial services companies in a particular geography. So let's look at building that up for specific territories. Now, one of the tools that I find particularly useful is the UK postcode areas map. And the reason I find this useful is it's a very visual representation of the different areas within the UK. Now, each area is denoted with a two-letter or one or two-letter postcode region, and these are also reflected in Judel. So you can use this map to outline your particular territory areas for your sales reps, and then you can use these postcodes to build up, again, with your saved search, particular territories. So let's see how this works in practice. So we're going to use Scotland as an example. So we'll take the company's trading address, and we're simply going to enter a list of postcode areas for Scotland. So KW, HS, IV, PH, AB, PA, FK, DD, G, KY, KN, MN, EH, DG, and TD. And if you're wondering where I got these from, it was simply reading out from the map those particular postcode areas. So we can see now how this has narrowed down my target, my existing account list to 28 results for companies in Scotland. Now this could be a list that you then export and send to your sales reps. But the other thing that's really useful feature of Judo is that you can share this particular combination of filters and then share that with others in your company. You can also add them to a particular list and then work through those companies. And this can be very useful if you are prospecting. So what you can do is you can add specific companies to different lists. You can share those lists and then have your sales reps work through the list systematically. And again, because you can dedupe lists against each other, it means that you can be sure that you've covered everything in that area systematically. So now let's take a look at using the data from Judo to make sure that your territories have a fair distribution of accounts if you have multiple team members within each territory. So we'll go back to our list that was exported from Excel. So as I said, this is a typical list that's come from Judo. I've included here a number of attributes that can be used to define the size of a company. I want to make sure that my sales team has the fair distribution, and I'm using company size to do that. But you might equally want to use different attributes. For example, you might want to use the industry segments that we built up, or any other attribute from Judo. Now I've got a formula here that I'll share that we'll send out after the webinar, but I found it particularly useful to distill the different attributes into a single tier. It might be that you have 3 or 4 sales teams that are based on company size. So you might have an enterprise sales team, and you might have an in-house sales team dealing with the smallest companies. So this is a formula that I've built that I'll send out after the webinar. And it simply says it's a nested if statement. So it's basically looking at the number of employees, and it says if either the number of employees is over 1,000, or the company turnover is over 500 million, or the net assets is over 250 million, then we'll class that as an enterprise account. If it's not that, then we look at 250 employees, over 50 million, and over 25 million net assets, and that's large, and so on for medium and small companies. And I found this a very useful formula just to distill the number of different attributes into a single tier. So we'll copy that down, and then that shows us our tier for each segment. Now, to make sure each rep within each tier receives an equal distribution of company sizes, we'll sort this list based on tier first of all. And then we'll sort it based on, let's choose turnover, largest to smallest. And then you can start to enter some of the reps' names. So let's just say Alan, Lena, Bob, Mary. And then again, we can copy these down. And then it will make sure that each person has the next in line in terms of company size. And the thinking there is that just ensures a fair distribution between the different company sizes within each team. And obviously you would do the different rep names, so Jane, Lorna, Mike, and Gary, and then you copy that down for your different tiers for the different reps. And then by the end of that, you'll have a set of reps, each with a set of companies. The other thing that I find useful is to make sure that your companies are consolidated if you have multiple companies in a group. So for example, large companies might have many subsidiaries, and they might equally have parents. So what you want to do, if you've got multiple accounts in your CRM, you want to consolidate them all with the same owner. So what we can do here is we can look at the Judeal ultimate parent, which is exported with a list. And what I've chosen to do here is to look at the ultimate domestic parent. And you get, when you export the list, you get an ID which relates to the company number of particular entities if they have a parent. So we're going to use this to populate the account hierarchies in your Salesforce or other CRM. And this is what the end goal is going to look like. So you'll have your parent company here. In this case, we have an example of Kuoni, and their subsidiary companies might be Donvan, GTA, Gulliver's, and RBA Software. And this is how we want it to ultimately look in our CRM. There's some assumptions that we need to make here as we're manipulating the data. So for simplicity, we're going to take two levels of hierarchy. We're going to look at the parent and the child. Obviously, in real life, many companies might have many levels of different subsidiaries, parents, and children. But personally, for simplicity and for reporting, I find it easier just to stick to the two levels of using the ultimate parent, and then any children have an equal status below that. The other assumption we'll make is where we have multiple child accounts with a parent in common. And these should obviously be grouped into one group company within your Salesforce. The other scenario might be where you have several child accounts, but actually the ultimate parent isn't existing in your CRM system. What we want to do in this case is make sure that you know about these so that you can add those parent companies, which gives each of the child accounts a parent to hold off. Now, there are also some cases where you have a single child account. In my opinion, you probably don't want to add the parent for that, because then you'll have two companies, and for simplicity, there's no particular need to have a parent and a child if there's only one child. So in those cases, we will simply just leave the child as an entity of its own. So there's another two formulas here in Excel that I use. The first one is to find out the status of the hierarchy itself, based on these assumptions that we've just looked at. So the way this formula works in a high level is to understand whether the company has no parent, in which case it's a standalone company, or if it is a company because that has been the parent reference is the company itself, or if it's a child with missing parents, this formula will look for the multiple children having the same parent reference, but then unable to find that parent reference within the company number. And then the final option will understand where there are multiple children that have the same reference and there is a parent company number, and if not, then it's a standalone. So when we apply this formula, we can see the result. So now we have multiple parents, some children with missing parents, and some children on their own. That lets us filter this list to find where our missing parents might be. And then these are the company numbers here of those particular missing parents. So what I'd advise here is to export this list and add it back into a new list in Judo. So import that as a CSV list upload. That'll give you your new companies that you can add to your CRM, from which place you can then start to do the final aspect of the matching process, which is to provide the ultimate parent ID. So the last piece of the puzzle to do this is to export all your company numbers and account IDs from your Salesforce. So that would simply be a list of company numbers and a list of your Salesforce account IDs. In this case, let's assume that I've done that exercise and I've added all the missing parents. So I'll come back to my original list. I want to find the ultimate parent for re-importing back into my CRM. Now I'm going to use a VLOOKUP to populate these references. And this VLOOKUP is probably one of the best formulas that there are in Excel. It essentially lets you take one ID number and match it to a spreadsheet where that ID number appears again. In this case, we're doing a little bit of a manipulation to make sure the company number format is the same. So you'll notice here the company number has the company/GB for the country before the company number itself, whereas the company numbers themselves are simply the company number. So this substitute statement is simply cleaning that up to make sure it's in the same format. Other than that, it's taking the ultimate parent reference, it's looking for that same ID within my second spreadsheet. So where it can find that ID, it will then return the Salesforce account ID to give me the account of that Salesforce parent. And you can see here it's populated that account ID. We can then copy that down and find the missing parent and find the ultimate parent. In some cases, the ultimate parent doesn't exist in Salesforce, and so we would need to repopulate those. That concludes our webinar. I hope you found this useful, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat box.
Great, thank you, Alan. So everyone online, I hope you found this session useful and gained some insight and ideas on segmenting your territory and using data to ensure fair distribution of accounts. So we have lots of questions. So one of the questions, if you're using Judo to prospect and you pull an extract of companies, are you able to dedupe this with what is in Salesforce? Yes,
so exactly. You can pull your search. Let me jump into Judo to show you. So let's just say you were looking for a financial services segment here. And if this was a prospecting list, this was the example where we have limited the search to only those that are in the Salesforce, because in the previous webinar, you'll remember, we uploaded our list of prospects into this, this list here. But if you want to prospect based on what is not already in your Salesforce instance, you would simply exclude that from your filters here. And that gives you your industry search minus what is already in your Salesforce. And you can apply that to multiple lists. So if you have several lists of accounts that are in Salesforce, you can add each of these and they'll be excluded from your prospecting list.
Perfect, thanks Alan. So got a question here from Christina talking about keywords. So how are the keywords assigned? Are you extracting website keywords?
They're from a range of sources that include the documents that we gather and company websites as well, I believe.
We also have a question about the effect of GDPR. This is from Rachel, so I'm just wondering what will the effect of GDPR in May 2018 on using data within Judo to target organizations will be?
Obviously, we are not able to advise on individual circumstances for GDPR, but I will say that Judo are committed to the compliance of GDPR, and because in general Judo provides company information, and as opposed to personal individual information. But that's probably something that's worth having a conversation with your account manager or sales representative.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan. Another one then. So is Judel available outside of the UK, or is it just UK organisations that are in the database?
So Judel is in the process of adding a number of additional international companies. Our main focus has been in the past for UK and Ireland, but again, it's worth having that conversation with your sales rep to find out what your specific needs are and whether Judel can provide the data that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think it's good to highlight as well that we've expanded our reach to 7 new countries. So France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, Norway, Netherlands, and Sweden. So yeah, definitely get in touch with one of our sales reps so they can fill you in with more information.
Yeah. And the other thing to bear in mind with this data is that if the data cleansing and data appending and the ultimate parent, if these are things that might fall outside your comfort zone, then we also have a professional services team that can help you to undertake this work and do the data cleansing and appending for you in your company.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan. I think that's the rest of our questions. Thank you for bringing everyone through that. Thank you all for joining. A member of our team will be in touch, so if you have any questions at all, please let us know. And have a great Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.